Hello and welcome back to Round the Archives in Conversation.
Hello.
Hello Lisa. Hello Martin.
Hello.
Hello Paul.
Hello.
Oh, good. We're all still here.
Everybody's here.
Everybody happy?
Yeah.
Or adequate?
Much, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, adequate, yes.
Well, today, and I guess we might have to give a spoiler warning, we're going to be talking about how series ended and how we think they might have continued had they gone for another season or whatever. So, I've got some ideas written down, but Paul, you've made a list as well.
Yes.
So, Paul, throw me a series and how you think it might have gone.
Well, there was one that Dark Shadows is one that I've actually been in a situation where I was asked, but only for a fanzine, to write what would have happened had the show continued into, well, for the rest of 1971 to 72. And I actually sat down, this was about 15, 20 years ago, and wrote about like a year's worth of plot lines, just in brief, as to where I thought things might continue. I can't actually remember a lot of the detail, but the thing about Dark Shadows is that it was often set in different periods of time for quite a long time, and Dark Shadows actually finishes in the past with a plot involving earlier versions of the Collins family, and it never returned to the modern day, which is where it started. Literally, you just get a voiceover sort of, and also by that point, Dark Shadows was doing alternate timelines and everything. So the storyline finished in the past, but it didn't sort of go back to 1971 to see what was going on there, which means that I think it would have been quite easy to have continued the show and just returned at that point to 1971 and then started a new plot line, introducing new characters or bringing back old ones. It would have left it in quite a good position had they wanted to continue it, but that's the most unfortunate thing is I did all this planning, and then I don't know whether the person who'd asked me to do it was so kind of gobsmacked by the fact that I actually done what he'd asked me to, or then sort of kind of decided that he wasn't going to use it after all. So at the time I was writing one of my own projects, and I just transferred all those plot lines into that series. As potential future plots for that show, I would just have changed the names. But I think that's the only time that I've actually, I've got theories on other shows as I will probably say later on. But that's the only time where a particular show I was actually asked to do that in actual real life sort of thing.
But is Dark Shadows, from your description, just a show that just stops, really? There's no definite end point, really?
Well, that plot line in that time period stopped or came to an end. I mean, at least it was the story was wound down and finished. And probably at that stage, you would have expected it to have returned to the modern day, which was always my favourite part of the show. As much as the show is set in the past in many periods, I always enjoy seeing everyone running around in their 60s and 70s sort of casual wear. I remember Elizabeth Collins wearing a dress that the pattern was so weird it was strobing on the screen. It looked like a vortex. You thought you might fall into it, but that could have been a plot line. Actually, that could have been a way of them getting into a different dimension, was to fall into Elizabeth's dress, but
sucked into people's soft furnishings.
Yeah. So Yeah, I always kind of liked because it is filmed in the 60s and 70s, which is now historical and interesting. I always like seeing those episodes more than I did people just putting on sort of period costume, which is I have the same problem with, to a certain extent, with Hammer films compared to Amicus films. I like seeing the Tales from the Crypt and stuff with people wearing 70s clothes rather than Hammer where people look. But anyway, that's just me. I do like the costumes of the era.
Well, we're all going back to 70s hair now, aren't we? So
that's true. But Martin, is there a show that you wish had carried on, and do you have any thoughts about where it might have gone?
I'm kind of intrigued. I always am amazed by the fact that Taggart managed to go on for so many years without Taggart. The actual lead actor, who was the title character of the programme, dying. But instead, they didn't rename the show. So Taggart became a word that meant murder in Glasgow, I think, really. if that's not too bizarre. So I kind of think the same thing would have worked for something like Dixon. I mean, I know a lot of people thought Dixon and Doc Green had had its day, but they could have done a sort of Dick Green Doc series, as it were. They could have actually done that, and it would probably have worked. I think they could have quietly retired George Dixon off and kept the show going. I mean, it was difficult because Andy had already left at that stage, but I think there was enough in the characters to sort of continue doing that sort of police series. Although I suppose because Z-Cars was still running, they would have become too similar and it would have been a problem. But I think it would have been interesting.
Because it's weird, isn't it, Lisa? That the penultimate season of Dixon feels like it's very much an ending, doesn't it?
It does.
Because you get that speech, and then the camera pans up to the blue light at the end.
Yeah.
But then you get a whole nother season on top, which I think works reasonably well.
So maybe they thought the previous season was going to be the last and then got recommissioned and sort of thought, But you sort of...
Lake 7.
Yeah. But you thought about Sergeant Wills as the lead character, haven't you?
Yes, well, I think there was a possibility at the time that it would carry on without George Dixon or Jack Warner, with the character of Sergeant Wills in the lead, and I think the idea was that they'd just call it Doc Green and it'd just be around the police station and the various different characters. So, because you got sort of Richard Heffer joining in that last season as a policeman, and his character really never went anywhere because he only had that one season. And the last episode is very bizarre as well, because it's all about a sort of reunion, isn't it? And with George Dixon and a lot of I can't even remember if they're army people or whatever, but it's a really weird sort of ending.
I've got a quote from Joe Waters, the producer, talking about John Nathan Turner being like typecast with working on Doctor Who. And he says pretty much the same thing happened to him on Dixon. And the quote goes, "I used to like John. He was always full of enthusiasm, but I know he was always very disgruntled when they wouldn't let him do," let me turn the page, "anything else apart from Doctor Who." It's the way I got typecast with Dixon or Doc Green, but I was lucky because Jack Warner was so old it had to be ended. If not, I'd still be doing it.
I'd be like Ken Ballo. But see, the fascinating thing to me is, what about if they'd actually combined the cast of Z-Cars with Dixon and done another police series that was like Doc Cars or something?
Doc Cars. That might work, But
I just feel you had two very strong, casts of supporting actors, all of whom could have raised their game and actually made an interesting series. But I think there was this feeling, wasn't there, in the mid-70s that police series is now the Sweeney, and that's what they should look like, and people won't watch ploddy old. I mean, of course, Dixon was doing some incredible stories, and Z-Cars were doing some incredible stories at that stage. So and instead the Z-Cars slot became Angels, didn't it? Really. More or less.
Would you say that the bill was more like Z-Cars or Dixon or
I think it was, yeah.
I mean, I did watch the bill for a few years, but I don't know how they compare in types of series. there were certainly more sort of local crimes and more day-to-day beat type stories.
I just think that those stories are interesting to tell. I mean, you know, sometimes we forget that it doesn't all have to be sort of, you know, screaming car chases and everything like that. And sometimes, you know, life is more about these small moments, and these are the things that devastate people. You know, I mean, as we're finding out at the moment, you know, it's the little things in life that actually, you know, affect people more. And maybe, you know, the problem is that if you decide that everything has to be action packed all the time, you start to lose that kind of storytelling. You know?
I mean, the Bill I don't really know that well. I don't know whether you've seen many, Lisa.
Again, you want Warren for that. Warren's
our sort of local expert on that. But there's one with Sylvester in, isn't there?
Yes.
It doesn't PJ Hammond write one or two?
I think he does. Yeah, I don't think they're quite as odd as he said Cars episodes he writes, because I'm not sure he can get away with that in the 80s. But
I watched the Bill, and I know they're totally different, but to me they were kind of I watched them at the same time. I watched the Bill and Casualty both before they became quite as prolific as they was. I watched Casualty, for instance, when it was 12 episodes a year or whatever, and the Bill was maybe on once a week or twice a week perhaps, but sort of maybe in the very early 90s.
You do get the impression though that they were floundering around really to find something that would fit the Z-Cars Dixon gap in the schedule. And actually, when you think about it, they had so many good actors and so many good characters already in place. Instead of floundering around, you just think, you know, instead of saying, "Oh, these are all old, we need something new." I know this is what happens when, you know, new heads of BBC One or whatever come in, but they just kind of think, "No, actually, that was good. Why don't we give it a tweak and do some more of it?" You know.
But Martin, you mentioned Blake Seven there for the unexpected extra season.
Yes,
and I just love the idea that they find out they're doing another season when it gets announced on the end credits. That's just such a wonderful idea. Oh, we're doing a fourth season. But then I think you almost get to the point that a fifth season would have actually been easier to commission, and wouldn't have been so much of a surprise. I mean, we have to do the spoiler warning thing again. But although that episode appears very final at the end, there are ways around it, aren't there?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the fascinating thing for me about Blake Seven is that every single season ended with something apocalyptic. It could have ended at the end of any one of those years, you know, and it was almost like they were daring them to cancel them.
Yeah.
But of course, the end of series 3, they have blown everything to smithereens, and then you think, oh, by the way, we're making another one. You go, oh, great. What have we got left? Hold on, you know.
What are the most convincing theories you've heard for a season 5 of Blake? Were they dead, but somebody survives and they continue with a new cast, or were they just stunned, or have you? I don't. There's so many different theories. I don't even know which is the most credible.
I've got the Afterlife book somewhere, you know, which was I think Avon and Villa were kind of surviving in that, from what I remember. It's a long time since I read it, but it's so there was a kind of semi-official follow-up book, but you know, I mean, I'm sure everybody, certainly I imagine loads of people on the Horizon fan club have their own theories as to what happened next. You know?
Well, I mean, it's fairly obvious there's only one gun that actually produces any blood, for one thing, so the rest could all be stunned.
Yeah.
And it's very much whoever wanted to come back next year, isn't it?
I think the basic idea was that if they'd done a fifth season, they would have said to people, "Do you want to come back?" And if they wanted to come back, they'd be alive. And if they didn't want to come back, they would have killed that character off. So.
But bear in mind, you've even got that Blake clone knocking about, haven't you?
Gosh, yeah.
So it doesn't even have to be the original Blake.
No.
So you know, anything's possible.
I do always struggle in these series though when there's some vague plot point from 3 years ago that they're supposed to remember.
Well, that's true.
They've had to signal that very, you know, carefully by having a lot of flashbacks or something.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. I remember they did something like that with. I used to watch Quantum Leap, but then by the final season of that, I was at university and I wasn't really. I mean, we'd watch every episode, and I remember watching the last episode, and it was referring
devastating,
back,
isn't it? That last line is absolutely devastating.
I just don't. But the thing is, they were referring to, like, I don't like it when they refer to like a particular episode you have to have seen season 1, and I remember watching it and thinking I can't follow this now. I've only been not watching it for a few weeks. Of course, you didn't necessarily have, back in the mid-90s, you wouldn't necessarily have had all of the episodes to have watched. Whereas now you could, if you had a box set, you could go back and go, oh, okay, right, I see what they're trying to do.
But again, not every viewer has the box set, do they?
No.
I mean, the fascinating thing for me is kind of the reverse of what we're talking about, is the X-Files, which really, please, just stop.
Can't even remember what I saw those later seasons. I can't even remember where we're at as far as what I can remember a scene on a dockyard or something in the last episode, but it wasn't like a big. It could have continued, but even more if they wanted to. But I kind of lost interest.
It is kind of weird. I mean, those kind of left-hanging episodes. I mean, there's so many series in America get cancelled before they've had chance to actually sort something out, and sometimes they do finish it on a cliffhanger. It's really quite annoying, But you get Sapphire and Steel with us as well, which is like, how do you get out of that? Somebody's got to write it, and I'm sure somebody has written it. But
I'm quite happy with. I mean, I saw somebody on Facebook complaining about the last episode of Sapphire and Steel being one of the worst endings of any series, and I remember thinking, don't agree with that at all. I like that ending a lot. It's probably more satisfying than the end of Blake 7 because it's harder to get out. I mean, I tend to think, the end of Blake is good because, yes, they're all dead. But then when you think about it, yeah, they could have been stun gun. But with Sapphire and Steel, it is pretty satisfying, I think. I mean, it's weirder with shows. I was thinking of like the Owen Allen shows where they don't have arcs really. So
they
like
just stop.
Yeah, I mean, Lost in Space just stopped, and I have a feeling that Voyage Bottom the Sea has a sort of an episode that works okay as a last episode, but obviously those characters are still continuing off screen, so that it's not a sort of. But then that's the case with a lot of things. I was thinking of, the last scene of Ace of Wands is like a big explosion, but I don't even know if that was meant as a sort of, will we be back, or what that was supposed to be, or whether that was just a coincidence that they wanted that episode to be. I don't know whether they even knew it was their last episode when they made it. So.
It is kind of weird because in America there's always that syndication. They want to be able to show them in any order, don't they? So they don't want, if it's, unless it actually has that kind of arc, But I mean, you think about the first series of Doomwatch. If they'd not made any more, it would just have ended with that explosion, and it would have kind of like, and it might have been better, in terms of people's memory of the show. But I just, there are moments where you just think, I mean, the thing I get about Sapphire and Steel specifically is that you've put these people into a trap, and that's great,
Yeah.
But and you've really, in the course of the 6 stories, is it 6 stories? 6 stories. You've not actually found out anything really about where they come from, what they do, why they do it. You literally know no more. And one of the things that I'm constantly quibbling about over on the Big Finish sites is these people who want answers to everything.
I don't like
answers. They want to know. Oh, what happens when that happens? You think, well, isn't it best just left as a kind of,
so
to your imagination?
It'd probably end up being really boring if you found out lots about them. I want mystery. I don't want the answers.
It's that whole thing about the Time War. Specifically, it's just like it's kind of like there as an abstract, but once you start picking at it. It can be fascinating, but it can equally be a bit. Well, once you've established that, you can't do anything else with it.
Well, one series that I've paid more attention to recently that I'd only I hadn't so much are things like Dynasty and the Colbys.
UFO, is that the UFO?
Yeah, the Colbys is. I always knew that Fallon went off in a UFO at the end of the Colbys, but now I'm finally going to see it. I mean, I pretty much bought the Colbys just because I want to see that. But what I didn't, I think I knew that Fallon came back to Dynasty after that, but I didn't know how they dealt with the fact that she'd gone off in a UFO, and apparently what happens is that she appears and she's ranting about the UFO, and eventually everyone sort of thinks she's been unwell and doesn't believe her, and eventually the plot line just kind of fades away, because it's sort of that sort of fascinates me that why bring her back into Dynasty if you've done that to her, but yeah, kind of. I didn't know the story behind what happened to her when she showed up again. She could have bumped into Mulder and Scully. Had it been a few years later, you've got a crossover between the Colbys and X-Files. That would have been a very different series.
Yeah, not only have you got to remember everything that happened in the first series of the X-Files, you've then got to remember what happened under Colby's 10 years ago.
I think Dana could probably have pulled off some big shoulder pads, a bit bigger hair.
That's true. They did a X-Files crossover with Millennium, though, didn't they? Or to try and wrap up that series, So that was. I enjoyed Millennium. I keep thinking I must rewatch Millennium. I think it's a good show. Yeah, but again, it was one of those ones that different producers took it in completely different directions each year, and kind of just ignored what had happened last year.
Yeah, I mean, two of my other shows that I really like, which are soaps. One is Sons and Daughters. It has a very good final episode where a lot of things are resolved, and there's a murder in the last few seconds that's been building for years. The sort of rivalry between the characters. But I think what I do wonder is, a lot of the other characters don't know about this murder at the end because that literally happens in the last few seconds. Someone, this character strangles somebody, and although it's kind of very dramatic, and I really like the last episode, I still would like to see what's the fallout from that. Again, like Dark Shadows, it could have continued because all those families would have been affected by what happened in that last episode. But I guess it's just a matter of drawing the line. I mean, the last episode of Prisoner also has a big sort of revelation where one of the bad warders who's always been successful all the way through the later part of the series gets her comeuppance, and but obviously it's a show about people in prison and people come and go, so although that is a good final episode, it could have continued. You could never totally, unless the prison's closed down and all the characters are dispersed, it would, but even that, I mean, that's happened on Orange is the New Black. They've closed the prison and dispersed characters everywhere, and the show's continued. They followed the characters rather than the prison in that show.
Fair enough.
Endings are curious.
It is kind of weird. I think if you've invested in characters, sometimes you feel they've had a satisfying enclosed life, and you've seen as much as you need to see of it. And then other ones you think, I wonder what happened next. I mean, you've got your very good friend Boise, doing his thing post when he falls on horses, and they can make whole other series of characters that you know and love already.
Well, I mean, that's another one. You've got the last time you see John Steed in the Avengers, he's going up into space with Tara, and yet a few years later, I mean, they never tried to plug that gap and say, oh well, he came down and Tara's now doing this. Or, they do fleetingly mention previous companions or previous assistants in the New Avengers in one of the episodes, but only sort of just sort of maybe
in passing,
yeah. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see what John Steed's up to 5 years down the line or whatever, having returned from space.
I have to ask, there are, of course, shows where it's been planned to do another season, and yet they never quite get round to it. So I'm thinking first of all of the Tripods, based on a trilogy, and we only do the first two and then leave it hanging.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Did you know how the Tripods would have gone at the time? I think I've read the books since, but it was never one of my favourite shows, I have to say. It just did seem to drag on anyway with 2 seasons. But
I think the second year was better. I remember getting quite into the second year. I was at college then, and I think we did sort of gather to watch year 2 because but year 1 was like farming with occasional.
Yeah, I don't think I came back for season 2. That's the trouble. It probably was more interesting, but I remember being, the whole episodes where you don't see tripods and stuff.
They went to the big city, I think, in the second series. Yeah. So it was a bit more peril, I suppose.
I don't know.
Perilous.
Don't know where I was when season 2 was on. But
what do you think about the proposed stories for seasons 23 and 27 of Doctor Who? So what would have been the season with Colin Baker that starts with the Celestial Toymaker, and the Sylvester McCoy ones where sort of Ace leaves and Doctor Who's in a safe and then his new companion finds him. So what do you think about what those stories might have been like?
I have to say, having seen the writer's room for season 23, or not the writer's room, the writer's table.
The writers go down the pub,
whichever it is,
and eat pies.
Yeah. I think we were better off with what we had.
Right.
Because looking at some of the stories, they don't look very good.
Which ones don't you like the sound of?
I can't even remember now.
There's one with Syl and the Ice Warriors and Woolly Jumpers, isn't there? Yeah,
that's Mission to Madness, isn't it?
Is that? Yeah, no, they're the ones that the target books of, aren't they?
Yeah.
Mission to Magnus and Nightmare Fair and all that.
Yeah.
And not Ultimate Foe. They did all that.
Ultimate Evil.
Which was the one? Which was the one that would have been filmed in Singapore? Was that the?
Yellow Fever. How to cure it.
Oh yeah, that was an Auton one, wasn't
it? That was the Autons, the
Yellow
Master,
Fever, and
the
How
Rani,
to Cure It, isn't it?
By Bob Holmes, a 3-parter, and I don't think Bob even started on the script.
That's just too much.
Yeah.
Too much stuff.
But I'd love
to
see I would have loved to see the storyline for that.
Yeah.
Just to see what he was thinking.
He was thinking, there's too many elements in this.
Give it to Terry.
It would have been nice to have seen just something simple like the Autons in another country, so you wouldn't have to make it that complicated. You could just stick to those elements and then work a little plot around.
Because it was something.
Especially it was only 3-parter.
It was something like the Master and the Rani are in a sort of street circus or something like that as well, wasn't it? They were like performing. And I'm just imagining
like
sort of
the worst sort of form.
Amy's Master doing a sort of one-man band with a flat cap on the ground, sort of
don't need any of that. We just need some Autons killing people in a shopping centre in Tokyo or something, or Singapore.
The shopping list approach really wasn't great, was it? Really, to be honest, it was. I think even with the ones they made, some of them feel a bit just one thing too many.
You have to keep keeping them on. The Autons should be, should be doing something with Autons and without involving other characters, other baddies.
Yeah, and what about writing out of Ace? Because it wasn't the idea she went off to be a Time Lord or something like that.
She went off to on a spaceship or something, didn't she? Yeah.
Open University.
I have heard those. I've heard because Big Finish have kind of done versions of that season.
All right.
And they're all quite entertaining. They do, at least the way they've done them in Big Finish. They sort of sound authentic, So I think they've done a run of the 4 stories, and I enjoyed them actually. Weirdly, I didn't think I was going to. I mean, there was one of those things that I waited till they had them in the absolute dirt cheap sale, but I sort of listened to them all in a week, and I thought, it's quite entertaining. I was quite happy with them,
I mean,
whether they would have worked on screen is a different thing,
Yeah.
I mean, the problem was always, wasn't it? I mean, the budget was being stretched and stretched and stretched all the time, and sometimes it started to show. I mean, it's the same thing with 2 Doctors. What you don't really need much. You don't need the Androgams really, or you don't need the Sontarans really. You one or the other, and then, but equally, you're going to bring back the Sontarans, then kind of forget what they look like.
I feel like the behind the scenes crew were a bit more stable for a season 27 than a season 23 as well.
Yes, true.
So, they kind of knew what they wanted to do and just didn't get to achieve it with the season 27.
I remember the first time I read about that scene with the safe. I read it in DWM however many years ago when they made it. It sounds wonderful. It really does sound so sort of just a nice quirky thing that would have been very visually interesting, and you would have gone, yeah, I could handle that. I like that. I like that as an idea. There's lots of good ideas in that season. And I feel that somehow the missing Colin Baker season, it's all the ones they did do as target books, especially, are all just. Because we'd already had these years of, we'll bring back this, we'll bring back that, and it was starting in many ways to feel flabby,
I have sometimes had bad dreams about what the Ice Warriors would have actually looked like. And how shoddy would they have been? Could they have only?
They'd have had a glowing red eye that flashed when they talked.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
and their underpants hanging out.
Yeah, there's one thing they would have got very wrong. I'm sure. I can't think.
It's actually quite weird, that, isn't it? It's almost like somewhere between 1976 and 1980, whatever, 3. They forgot how to make rubber costumes.
But let's move on to sort of when sort of people occasionally burn their own bridges, and I'm thinking of the Goodies ITV, because I enjoyed that ITV season. But then the bills start coming in, don't they? And ITV go, maybe we won't do a second season after all. And then the Goodies can't really go back to the BBC at this point, can they?
No.
But one of my favourite ones from that ITV season is the Arthur C. Clarke one. And I'd just like to see the Goodies taking the pee out of more ITV shows, and I'm sure they could have pulled off a few, So yeah, I always think there was more potential there. I don't know if anyone's...
nice if they'd bought back the adverts, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Get tin covered in even more beans. Yeah. But of course there are some shows which are utterly forgotten now.
Yes.
Which we're starting to discover, and we're disappointed to find out there's only one season of it, or in some cases half a season. So, lurking over here, I'm just going to stretch over. Here's our DVD of Zodiac. Now, does that name ring any bells with you two?
Yeah, I've got that.
You've got Zodiac. Have you watched it?
I haven't watched all of them, but I've certainly watched the first couple. Sort of interesting sort of. Yeah, I think if I knew there were lots of seasons, I probably would have been more enthusiastic. Because when you find there's only one season, it's sort of like we don't want to get into it too much. Because there's only these 6 episodes or whatever there is.
Well, that's the silly thing. It's called Zodiac, and they only do 6.
Yes, they don't even do the full Zodiac.
They don't even get round to 12.
No.
Half a year and half a year, half a year.
But yeah,
isn't one of the series of Into the Labyrinth something similar?
I don't know, because
something about.
Well, Into the Labyrinth, the first 2 seasons are Ron Moody.
Yes.
And although they're dreadfully cheap, they're not bad.
No.
But then you've got Chris Harris, who, we've never made it past the first episode, have we?
No.
And,
No, it's
What's
fairly bad.
What year was Zodiac made?
It's early 70s, isn't it?
Hang on, if I open...
But is it after Catweasel? Because the second year of Catweasel is kind of Zodiac symbols, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is. Yeah.
This is 74.
Yeah.
Yes. February 1974 it starts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's see if I can get it back in
it's
there.
always been mentioned by John Pertwee in Who Done It. Every time he announces Anushka Hempel, he says about Zodiac. Because that's the
Anusha's been acting.
Yeah.
But of course she's ex of UFO, isn't she?
Yeah, she's in UFO. She's in Space 1999.
Yeah. So she has got a few more things to her credit.
But they're just like little parts, I think.
But then UFO never goes to a second season, and it sort of mutates into Space 1999, doesn't it?
True.
Yeah.
So,
But having looked at it, it looks
Sort of.
dreadfully dull.
What?
UFO.
What, UFO?
Yes.
You're not a fan, Lisa?
Well, we consider doing it as for a possible future edition of RTA, and I looked at all the episodes and I couldn't actually find one that I.
Oh, you should
really
watch Time
wanted to
Lash.
watch.
That's a great
Yeah,
one.
I think the thing about UFO is actually that when they had a mid-season break and they lost lots of the actors and they had to shift to a different studio, and the ones they did afterwards are brilliant.
The ones with what's her name?
Wanda Ventham, yeah.
Yes, those are the best ones. I prefer that era of UFO to anything of Space 1999.
And Mindbender is
Yes.
the one where they go behind and suddenly everything's just a set.
Yes, yeah.
It's an astonishing piece of television. You know, it's fabulous. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love
I always did like UFO, but then again, I was probably the right age when it was on. You know. But there are some quite laborious ones. You know.
I actually recently. I started. I bought the set, and I decided to watch it backwards to sit. So I was aware of sort of when Wanda Ventham left, and then you suddenly were in the original. Because I thought, well, I like all the later episodes, so I'll watch it backwards, and that might make it more bearable to watch the early ones. But.
Well, I mean, George Sewell basically
Yes, yeah.
turns into Wanda Ventham
Yes, yeah.
in a kind of bizarre kind of a way. But she is in one of the early episodes, very briefly. You know, so she is kind of part of the team, as it were.
Yeah.
But George Sewell and UFO didn't seem the greatest mix, to be honest. When you watch him in Special Branch, he's very good, but it kind of, yeah, I don't know. I never really know whether the sci-fi thing was really his thing. He kind of feels like he's walked into the wrong program somehow.
But what other shows would you like to see more of, Lisa?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just looking at the list, thinking. I think I would have probably liked to see more Ghosts of Motley Hall. I think that's pretty cool. We could have done another series of that.
Okay.
I think because that finishes on quite a final note in some ways. But yeah, possibly.
What about a proper last episode of Rent-A-Ghost?
Yeah,
The last season just ended with every week with the "Don't go into the cellar."
Yes.
So the last episode just ends like that, like all the other episodes
It does.
of that season.
It does.
So
yeah.
they don't ever go into the cellar.
No, they
Well,
always
different
go into
characters
the
do.
cellar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I've seen the scene. They go into the cellar and there's sort of Amy McDonald and a policeman or something like that, and then they all aren't they all dressed as like 18th century or something like that. I don't know quite what's going on
Can't
there.
remember what's going on here.
But yeah, I did actually dig out the novelisation the other day and went in the
did.
bath with it
You did.
to explain where the dragon
drown it.
actually came from,
Yes.
because it's to do with lighting the boiler
Yeah,
or
it's
something.
to do with firing the boiler, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bernie St. John.
Bernie St. John, which is quite a good joke. Yeah.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, he's done by the same people that do Dobbin, I think. So.
Well, I think they're in the same shot
Yeah.
sometimes, so unless they're nipping around really
Yeah.
fast, I think you've got to have some.
I think
other
it's
people.
done in the same way.
Oh, right,
I mean,
yeah.
but yeah.
It was a shame they didn't do an episode involving going to the sea and then bumping into a Merker or something like that.
Now there's a crossover. People want the Daleks in Blake 7, but the Merker in Rent-A-Ghost. That's what you need.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
And they wouldn't have had to pay people twice either, would they?
Yeah.
But Paul, have you got any more on your list or not?
Well, I've got Bergerac because it interests me that the last 2 years of Bergerac is increasingly set in France because he gets a French girlfriend whose father owns a vineyard, and then he, in the final series, he even leaves the Bureau des Étrangers and becomes a special, like, private detective. But then it jumps on again for the very, very, very final episode. He's back on the drink. The French girlfriend's dumped him, and I can't even remember where he's living. So you still get Charlie Hungerford and all that sort of thing, but and I think there's maybe some ray of hope that maybe he and Charlie are going to do some business thing beyond the final episode. But again, because Bergerac didn't die in the last episode, it could have continued. It could have continued anywhere, really.
Could have done one-off specials or something.
Yeah.
Bergerac in a box.
Well, he did have a bit, and he did have a bit of there's a gap of a few years between Bergerac and Midsummer Murders as well. I'm sure he was doing other things, but he probably could have done a special once a year or something. But yeah, it's sort of feels a little bit up in the air. Although it's kind of nice that it has broken out of the formula of just being set in Jersey. I mean, the thing I would have liked to have seen most of all on Bergerac was the Ice Maiden, played by Lisa Goddard, having her own series, because a female Rattles or a female sort of villain, and she played. That's the best thing I've ever seen Lisa Goddard in, was Bergerac, and she should have had a.
It's like what was the girl on the bus in the Doctor Who in the desert one?
Yes, yeah.
Same kind of thing, I suppose. Yes. Kind of.
Yeah.
I tell you, so that's the kind of thing that interests me, because I mean sometimes it's the actor, isn't it, who wants to finish it? You know, I mean it's why you never got any more shoestring, and why you got Bergerac. You know.
Well, there is that quote, and I think we've talked about it before, where Andrew Cartmell says, John Nathan Turner went upstairs to talk about future projects and was really excited. He came back down and he was simmering with fury. He said, they offered me Bergerac. I said I'd only do it if I could fire John Nettles and change the location from Jersey. So I'm just trying to imagine the John Nathan Turner version of Bergerac.
In Brighton, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely be in Brighton. Yeah.
Without
Let's wave at Jersey occasionally.
Bergerac would have been, well, we would have brought a bit of Dynasty in and had Bergerac in a big like some explosion, and he'd had to have plastic surgery. When he emerged, he's played by some actor to John Nathan Turner's sort of choice. So
with
that
terrible tasting clothing.
Yeah.
Well, you see, now you've made me think of the last season of Hello Hello.
Yeah.
Oh right.
Yeah.
Where I think it is definitely a show that goes on longer than the war, isn't it? But
twice as long as the war, isn't it?
But you suddenly get Herr Flick having plastic surgery, don't you?
Yes, and coming back as a different actor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think
that
works?
Mind you,
no.
When you talk about long wars, I mean, you've got MASH, you know, and I think MASH has about 5 Christmas episodes in the course of its running. I absolutely adore MASH, and I could have quite happily sat through more and more years of MASH, but I think it possibly had, run its course, really.
It kind of interests me with when characters are recast, and sometimes they explain it, and sometimes, as I'm seeing in Dynasty, one of the Carrington's sons, Stephen Carrington, vanishes at the end of season 2, is heard to be in a big oil refinery explosion, and then next thing you see, he's covered in bandages and he comes back as a different actor, so he's had plastic surgery. Whereas I remember back when I was a schoolboy and Neighbours was popular, Scott Robinson, who was later to marry Charlene, was originally played by someone else, and they didn't explain it. Scott just turns up and everyone's acting like, I've never seen a show where a character's been recast other than Doctor Who, and I'm thinking, how is he putting over the wool that he's Scott? Can't they see he's not Scott? And I just didn't understand. I was thinking, it took me a while to realise, they just recast it and they're not saying anything.
How did you cope with Donna Reed?
It's difficult.
Because there is a Kenny Everett sketch about Dallas, where Miss Ellie's different in every shot.
Yeah.
They cut away to Kenny Everett and cut back, and she's changed, and then cut away and she changes again.
Because they've actually done that quite recently on Mrs. Brown's Boys, because one of the actors that played one of the sons left, and they actually wrote it in that he had a facelift, and when they pull the bandages off, it's a different actor. So they're still doing that now.
Yeah.
Is it Bread where some of the main characters change?
Yes. Bread, you get the change between
Joey,
Joey, yeah, but
and Abilene,
and Abilene, yes,
Abilene,
yes.
Yeah.
And it's always it's good. Yeah, it always amuses me that it was described as it went from the clean-shaven Joey to because the next actor that played him was had more of a 3 o'clock shadow. A 3 o'clock shadow? A 5 o'clock shadow, whatever it's called.
Depends how fast it grows.
Yeah.
7:15 shadow.
Yes.
Absolutely. But you see, the thing about I've seen one of the bread actors advertising Haribo recently, haven't I?
Oh yeah, that's Victor Maguire, who was in Goodnight Sweetheart as the best friend.
I was looking at. I haven't watched any of the new episodes of Dynasty, but I was looking on the website when I was trying to see which characters had continued, even if they're played by different people. And it would seem that recasting is even more the case in the current series. There's one character I think has been played by about 3 different actresses already, and they've only done like 3 seasons of the new Dynasty. But so yeah. Nothing's changed.
It's Cagney and Lacey all over again, isn't it?
Yeah. And also, of course, our Tracy from Coronation Street, who goes up to her bedroom for 6 months and comes down with a different head.
She's like Wurzel Gummidge.
Yeah.
That happened with Lucy Robinson on Neighbours, and there were 2 versions, and then there was a 3rd version. And to be fair, that 3rd version still has played her on and off for the last 25 years. So the third time lucky with Lucy Robinson. But I suppose with that as well, they did cast people who were, because they wanted to age the character up. They did cast people. I suppose that is probably the case with Tracy Barlow as well. But, and the current Tracy has played it for a long time now. So.
She has.
Well, sometimes the age jump is quite considerable, though, isn't it? It's more than the intervening years would have been.
Yes. I'm trying to think of the names. I know there's at least there's another character on Corrie who should only be about 35 or something, and when he came back he already looked 40, and they kind of lost 10 years somewhere.
William Roach was playing younger, wasn't he, when it started?
Yeah, now he's playing,
and he's actually 88, so technically
I think I read somewhere that he's playing 5 years younger now, or he was a few years ago. That's when they were marking birthdays, they were saying he was 5 years younger. When he does look good for his age, he has aged well. He certainly had to when I last watched it. But,
that's a peculiar acting career, though, isn't it? It really is. And you think, some people become actors because they want to do different things all the time, and he basically, when he was 20, had this role and has done it forever. I tell you, some of these Doctor Who's could stick around like that, I'll tell you.
I think, having been in the same job for nearly 20 years, I think I'd probably be a bit of a William Roach if I was on Corrie. I like the idea.
If you could,
if I knew that I could stay, if I knew I could stay on the series, they keep me on.
Is it Adam Woodyat? Is he still in
yes, he is.
Mm.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's quite interesting to see the show evolve, or what they find you to do.
It is bizarre to watch a show that you've known for a long time and then watch the early episodes again and see how young everybody's looking.
Yeah, and every time I see Ian Beale on EastEnders, even in like magazines and stuff, he looks like he's gone through lots of really. His character, at least, has gone through a lot of. He always, I think he's like living rough. Last time I saw, I never hear good things about that character as far as he hasn't won the lottery or having a nice day. He always seems to get the worst of.
Mind you, they had a couple of Michels as well, didn't they? And a couple of Marks in the Fowler clan.
I think that might be. I think they resisted with Michelle for years, hoping that Sue Tully would come back. But now she's a director; she doesn't do acting. So they finally went, "Oh, we want her back. We'll have to recast her."
Her last episode was the last EastEnders I ever saw. So that's quite a while ago now.
Yeah. I haven't seen one for a while. I'm trying to think. I think I might have watched it. I might have tuned in again when Den Watts came back for a while, and then I think I stopped watching again, and then I heard he was being killed off, so I watched. But that's probably 15 years ago.
How about sort of more scripted endings of shows? And I'm thinking in particular about the last episode of The Prisoner, which is bonkers.
Yeah,
but. It
makes sense.
It makes sense in its own way, I guess, doesn't it? So, certainly the last 4 or 5 episodes of The Prisoner, McGowan's just got total control and is doing what the hell he likes. And you'd never be allowed to do that now. No. But it sits quite nicely, sort of in the sort of the pantheon of TV as its own
they gave
thing,
him the extra
it?
4, didn't they? They'd done the 13, and they gave him the extra 4. And I think episode 16 was supposed to be the end of the first season or something. The first Liam McKern, sorry, the second Liam McKern, but the one where he came back. And that was supposed to be the end of the first series, and then they were going to make a second series. And basically, everyone just went nah. But those last 4 are just creatively explosive. They really are. They're astonishing pieces of television. The what's the other thing though? I think the best thing is if they do a proper finale. I mean, I know sitcoms have started doing it in America now, real proper last episodes, and they're written as last episodes, and everybody knows it's the last episode. And these are the things that people tune in for, So something like Cheers will get a proper final episode, or even crazier to a certain extent, although not in the same way. And again, my go-to is always the MASH finale, because I just think it's an incredible hour and a half of television.
I mean that.
I've got MASH at home, but I haven't got through it yet. But
it's funny. I always start with season 4 when I go through it. When BJ comes in, and I know a lot of people think the first 3 years are great and everything else is rubbish, but actually that's the era I remember, and so I just go from the beginning of season 4 right through to the end. Then I usually watch the first 3 seasons after that.
Yeah.
Sometimes mine always ends with Henry's plane going in the sea, so it's a bit sad, really. That's my way of watching it.
When I was watching, I was interested to be reminded when I rewatched This Life recently that at the end of the second season, various different things have happened, and maybe different characters are going to be going off to do other things. But I think the intention was, because right at the very after the titles, you see like an advert in a newspaper saying rooms for let in a house, and someone circles it. I think maybe the premise was that even if the regulars don't come back, you'll have a new house full of people, which would have been quite interesting. I know they did that. I didn't really watch Skins, but I think with Skins, didn't they have characters who as they got too old for the show moved off and new ones came in, I suppose, like Grange Hill.
So it was the same house but different people.
So it would have been quite
interesting idea, actually.
It would have been quite interesting to have seen what third season of This Life. As it was, they did a movie like 10 years later as to what those characters were doing, rather than if there had been a third or fourth season, I guess they wouldn't have done necessarily done a 10th anniversary, because they would have just been the original cast. And
the old bunch.
It wouldn't have mattered so much, because they'd have had lots of other people in that house. But
what's your feelings generally on the idea of spin-off? Do you all prefer spin-offs, or do you prefer extended runs of the original?
Trying to think of.
Can anyone think of a good spin-off? I suppose is what.
Well, Softly is technically a spin-off of Z-Cars,
and I think that works. Okay.
The only trouble is the really early stuff we haven't seen, so we know it more in its Task Force incarnation. So I think that's perfectly reasonable.
But what I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is it's a spin-off that is the continuation of a series. I mean, Z-Cars carried on, didn't it?
Yeah.
What I mean is it's kind of like Green Grass is a follow-on series to Only Fools and Horses, but there was a gap, and then there was a different show. But what I mean is do you feel that ever is that better? I mean, Frasier is very good, isn't it, compared to Cheers? So it does work. I'm just wondering if anybody else has a kind of favourite spin-off, or one that they think exceeds the original.
I mean, I guess some people, again, it's not really my area, but Happy Days leads to a fair few, doesn't it?
All sorts, yes.
Yeah, can you get Joni Loves Chachi and Morgan Mindy?
Yeah.
And Laverne and Shirley.
Mindy, of course.
Oh God, you get 3 from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, out of those, I think Morgan Mindy works the best. I quite like Laverne and Shirley as well, actually. I've seen a few of those, and they're quite fun. So.
Because all the Law and Orders and the CSIs had spin-offs, but they did the same thing where they kept on going with the original. I was just sort of wondering about ones that actually complete, what was trying to extend the story, if you like, when the original cast have said they don't want to do it anymore. I just wondered if there were any really good ones that we can.
I guess we mentioned the Gentle Touch last time. You've got Cat's Eyes, which is yes. I mean, and that was a completely different type of show, but I know that I think it must have been quite popular at the time. A lot of people.
3 years, 3
years. And you sort of hear people of a certain age talking about Cat's Eyes more than Gentle Touch. So I think it depends of your age a bit, maybe as well. And
I suppose the new Avengers falls into that as well,
yes,
doesn't it? Really?
I mean, we've got some. It Sticks Out Half a Mile, which is the radio sort of follow up to Dad's Army.
Yes,
and
right.
I think that might have been interesting as a TV show. There was the odd attempt to do it in various forms, but because you've got the sort of age of the cast,
yes,
it's a bit
started
awkward.
To get a bit tricky.
But that's not bad.
No,
what I've heard, I've enjoyed. So I might have been interested to see that on the telly. Yeah,
there is also Don't Drink the Water.
Yeah,
which is possibly not the most successful spin-off.
So that's a spin-off from On the Buses.
From On the Buses,
yes.
Yeah.
What about? Was it Grace and Favour? What's that called?
The
sequel to Are You Being Served? I don't think.
That's not great. It's not great.
Are the ones with the the other one, Heidi High cast? Are they spin-offs? Are they the same characters in different situations, or are they just the same actors?
They're just the same actors, because obviously you got
right. So they're not seen as actual follow-ups.
No, because you actually got your run model. She's set before Heidi High. That's set in the 20s. So just utilising the same actors. Yeah. I quite like your run models.
Yeah.
Though it tends to be more of a comedy drama, because obviously they're 45-minute long episodes.
I've not seen much of it, but then I quite like No Dr. Beeching, if only for its theme tune and its amazing crane shots.
Oh gosh, yes, you get a lot of wonderful crane shots in that.
Yeah.
But again, Dr. Beeching isn't actually the same characters.
No.
I'm not familiar enough with them to be sure.
It's just the David Croft ensemble cast,
which we saw last night in Up Pompeii.
In watching Up Pompeii, we started to spot them in that as well.
Yeah, we're going, oh god. Nicholas Smith pops up,
but you see, you also get that interesting thing, don't you, where you change the lead, and it's the same show, so you get Juliet Bravo with two different sort of incarnations, as it were, and you kind of think, is that better than doing a remake or doing a new show?
I guess crossing the pond, you've got Buffy and then Angel having its own life. And was the Bionic Woman, that was a sort of spin-off from Bionic Man, wasn't it? But I think I've probably seen more Bionic Woman than I've seen Bionic Man, just because I happened to have a box set of one randomly. Sometimes difficult to think of things that were actually spin-offs.
I sometimes wonder where the young ones might have gone after that final episode with the bus and the cliff. Could those characters have transplanted beyond student life? I really don't know, because Bottom is in some ways, you can almost see the connection, can't you? So
it's Filthy Rich and Cat Flap as well. Kind of, isn't it?
And you had suggestions for what a fifth season of Blackadder would have, when it would have been set.
Well, Blackadder's the sort of opposite of some of the things we've been talking about, isn't it? It's kind of like the same cast, but in a completely different situation.
They often talked about doing something like in the 60s, but I wouldn't have thought it would have had the same, because setting it around monarchies and kings and queens and sort of political things, just setting it in the 60s, where it would have been a little bit. I'm sure there would have been. You could have had sort of music moguls and all that sort of thing, but it's not quite the same.
I suppose they could have done the 50s and done the Suez Crisis or something and done it in politics, But
Because the one where they've built the time machine,
Yes.
that special,
The Millennium Special.
that works quite well. But it's almost like you can feel Rowan Atkinson going, "Do I want to play Doctor Who or not?" It's just interesting that you can see that connection with the Curse of Fatal Death, which is around the same time, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you had done another series of Blackadder, you could have set it in the early 60s and had it around the Puma affair. So had him as a sort of civil servant or a sort of government member or something. So,
but I suppose there would have been felt that Yes Minister had kind of covered a lot of that sort of ground very well at that stage. But also, of course, there's another spin-off, isn't it? Yes Prime Minister from Yes Minister.
Oh yeah.
I always thought it was very like Blackadder. There was that one season thing, Let Them Eat Cake, with French and Saunders, that was set in the sort of French Revolution.
Oh
That was very, and that's I watched that recently, and it's very funny. It is Blackadder by any other name, really.
If they could have gone further back in time instead of constantly going into a newer era, do you think there are any areas of history you would have liked them to do?
Well, I think doing a Chelmsford 1, 2, 3 era would have been quite good.
So what sort of Romans and ancient
Roman
Britain.
Yeah, that might have been interesting. But of course, Chelmsford's already done it, so that's the thing. Yeah.
But nobody remembered that, I don't think.
No. That's got the TARDIS in it, Chelmsford 1, 2, 3. Yeah, briefly.
Or just go into the Dark Ages and do what you like.
Yeah.
I just think different. What I'm saying is, if there were any sort of different courts, like in like the court of Richard I or something, or if there was a different kind of Blackadder era. Would you pluck one from the air?
I'm still very fond of that first season for its sheer sort of dirt. It is very squelchy, isn't it? So, and I think that works really well. Yeah.
I'm not sure Richard I would work, purely for the fact they didn't really spend any time in the country for his entire reign. He was mostly out in the sort of fighting the Crusades. Because he once said he'd ransom London, sell London if you could, to raise money.
Yeah.
See, I pluck a monarch from the air, and his history I know not where.
Maybe a sort of you can obviously get that one little bit with Stephen Fry as Charles I, who is far too tall to be Charles I. Far too tall. So maybe a sort of a civil war.
Yeah, civil war.
Oh yes,
good.
yes.
Because you could have them.
The Cromwell and that lot. Yeah.
I could slip my Cromwell story in here now.
Oh, what's your Cromwell story, Lisa?
Yes, Oliver Cromwell. He nearly didn't make it to being an adult, Oliver Cromwell, because when he was a baby, he was visiting with his parents, his grandfather, and his grandfather had a monkey, and the monkey stole the baby Cromwell and took him up on the roof, and had to be tempted down with jam. So
saved by jam.
Yeah, if he'd been dropped by the monkey, it could have been a slightly
or they didn't
different
have any jam.
War. Didn't have any jam. Yeah.
The whole Civil War could have been very different.
Well, it wouldn't have been, because you still had sort of Fairfax and people like that who were the real sort of.
But I just love the idea that Cromwell was stolen by a monkey.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's my pull-out quote for this issue.
Yeah.
It took us a while.
I was just thinking, saved by the jam from going underground. I like that.
But we're running out of time again, so...
that we always...
Yeah, I know. But Paul, have you got any more ideas for final episodes?
My final word would be, I was thinking today what a last episode of Tales of the Unexpected would be like if Roald Dahl woke up in the shower and you realised that the previous seasons did not exist. But I think that
would have turned out to be Roald dancing in the title sequence.
Oh dear. Oh, there's an image.
I'm not sure he would have been up to dancing with his bad back anyway.
Did he have a back?
he got he was in a plane crash, wasn't he?
Oh right, okay.
So he was in hospital for quite a long while, which is why he had a chair with a hole in it. So in his study, his shed, his chair that he had, it was I think either had a hole in it or something. It was so that he could sit there for a long while and it wouldn't hurt his back.
Oh, right, okay.
Because he
I was imagining the hole was somewhere else.
No.
Oh, commodious.
He suffered with a bad back because of his plane crash.
That might be why in the latest series, in some of the American episodes towards the end of the series, he suddenly pops up, introducing some episodes, but they haven't got the usual sort of set which he had in the early episodes. He just seems to be standing in a dark studio with a chair, but he's not sitting in the chair. He's sort of got his arms around the back of the chair, so maybe the chair wasn't up. He was like, I'm not sitting in that.
I thought he was going to be leaning on a fireplace in a Christmas card Dickensian way.
Well, on that thought, we'll say,
I'm just thinking commodious. That's too much Claudius.
Yeah. We'll say thank you for joining us, and we'll bring this in conversation to an end. So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And thank you, Martin.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye bye. Take care.
Bye bye.